I knew it was close. I thought it was very close, too close. But I said, rather than say, no, I don't want to do that, I said, Sergio, where are you going to be?
Clint Eastwood, Hollywood's eternal enigma. A man who conquered the silver screen not with volume but with silence. His eyes told stories, his squint became a signature, and his voice, rare, measured, and always calculated. For over 6 decades, Clint wasn't just an actor. He was a force, a storm you didn't see coming until it had already passed. And yet for all the roles he played, gunslinger, cop, soldier, cowboy, the one role he kept fiercely private was himself. In an industry addicted to headlines and oversharing, Clint Eastwood carved his legacy through mystique. He didn't do tell-all interviews, he didn't write memoirs, he didn't chase attention. And maybe that's why. When whispers began to swirl about a secret hidden for decades, something deeply personal, people couldn't stop listening. But to understand the weight of what Clint Eastwood finally confirmed at 95, you have to understand the man who spent a lifetime not confirming anything. He played men on the edge, characters hardened by life, bruised by war, soured by betrayal. There was always a storm inside Clint's performances, barely restrained. But off-screen that storm was locked down. He was famously stoic, the kind of man who, according to co-stars, could go entire shoot days without speaking unless the camera was rolling. Friends described him as an island. Directors called him one of the last real men of Hollywood. And the press? They stopped asking personal questions long ago, because Clint never gave them answers. Clint Eastwood has always operated like an old-school cowboy. You can ride with him, but don't ever ask what's in his saddlebag. Still, the mystery wasn't just a media strategy. It was a defense mechanism. Clint came up in the golden age of tough guy actors, where showing emotion was weakness and privacy was sacred. Over the years, he was romantically linked to many women, but emotionally tied to very few. Even his own children described their father as guarded, compartmentalized, and difficult to know. And that silence became his armor, his power. But behind that armor, there were shadows, whispers, questions no one dared ask aloud. Had Clint Eastwood, the untouchable icon of American cinema, hidden an entire chapter of his life? A child? A daughter? A decision made in his youth that followed him through 9 decades of stardom? At 95, the silence finally cracked, and when it did, it revealed a truth more human and more heartbreaking than anyone expected. Fame is often sold as a gift, a golden ticket to endless applause. For Clint Eastwood, it came as both a crown and a cage. By the time the world recognized him as Hollywood royalty, he had already learned the rules. Power has a price, and privacy is the currency few are willing to protect. Clint's ascent was meteoric. From the rough-hewn cowboy in Rawhide to the iconic anti-hero in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, he became synonymous with toughness, control, and charisma. And with each role, the world demanded more than his performances. They wanted the man, himself. Every glance, every rumor, every woman he was seen with became front-page news. But Clint Eastwood, the man behind the myth, had a different agenda. He built walls, carefully and deliberately. Interviews were rare, paparazzi encounters were minimized, and most importantly, the truth about his private life was locked away, sealed under decades of discipline and silence. For years, reporters would chase stories of secret romances or hidden children, but Eastwood rarely reacted. When asked directly, he deflected, laughed lightly, or simply changed the subject. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't contempt, it was strategy. A man who spent his career portraying control understood that the ultimate power is to decide what others will never know. This distance extended beyond Hollywood. Even those closest to him often saw only fragments. Children from different relationships knew him, but not always fully. Romantic partners glimpsed warmth, but never complete access to the man behind, the legend. Yet the public never stopped wondering. Every fleeting appearance of a young woman on set, every hint of whispered rumors, became fodder for speculation. And still, Clint remained untouchable. His silence became his signature. His refusal to confirm anything created a magnetic pull, the audience always curious, always guessing. By shielding his personal life, Clint didn't just protect himself, he controlled the narrative. While the world fixated on his films, he quietly curated what they would know of him. And sometimes what they didn't know was far more powerful than what they did. But every fortress has cracks. Every carefully guarded life has moments when the walls falter. And for Clint Eastwood, that moment would come much later. Decades into fame at the age of 95. Because fame may grant power, but it cannot erase human truth. And truth eventually always finds a way. In a life defined by discipline, distance, and legendary silence, Clint Eastwood was about to reveal the one secret he had kept closest to his heart. A revelation that would confirm what fans had long suspected but dared not believe: Carmel by the sea, a picturesque coastal town in California, known for its misty beaches, quaint cottages, and a man who would shape its history in more ways than one. Clint Eastwood, the silent titan of Hollywood, wasn't just a star on the silver screen. In 1986, he took on the role of mayor, embracing civic responsibility with the same stoicism that defined his career. But even in a small town, whispers have a way of growing louder. Beneath the charm of Carmel's winding streets, rumors began to circulate, a quiet, almost imperceptible murmur about Clint Eastwood's personal life. Not the tabloids' usual speculation about movie roles or box office numbers. Something more intimate, something unspoken for decades. Locals recall subtle hints, a glance too long, a casual mention, an unfamiliar young woman in town who seemed connected. It wasn't blatant. There were no headlines, no press conferences, no public acknowledgement. Just shadows, glimpses, and questions that lingered in hushed conversations. "People around here always knew Clint was private," said one longtime resident of Carmel. "But sometimes you'd catch a whisper. Something about a daughter, a child nobody ever met. People would talk quietly in cafes as if saying it out loud might break some invisible rule." Eastwood had spent decades building a reputation for discretion, but whispers have a way of surfacing, no matter how carefully someone guards them. Rumors of a secret child, long dismissed as tabloids' exaggeration, were quietly taking root in the town where he lived, worked, and became mayor. Friends and former colleagues who had known Eastwood for years confirmed that he was fiercely protective of certain parts of his life. Some even suggested he had intentionally planted misleading stories to distract the press from what he considered most private. But even he could not contain every rumor forever. The whispers in Carmel were different from the Hollywood gossip mill. Here they carried weight. People spoke not to sell stories, but because they knew something intimate had been concealed. And for years the town held on to these fragments, the loose threads of a story that would eventually unravel, decades later, revealing the truth behind the legend. By the time Clint Eastwood reached his 90s, those whispers had grown into a quiet certainty. People who had known the town, known the stories, and even known the family began piecing together a narrative no one outside Carmel suspected. And one by one, the hidden details, the ones Clint had protected so carefully, were ready to emerge. Carmel was more than a town to Clint Eastwood. It was a place of refuge, a place to retreat from the glare of fame. But it was also the birthplace of a mystery that would follow him into his 95th year. The mystery of a daughter kept out of public view, hidden behind a lifetime of silence. And it was here, in the quiet corners of Carmel, that the first pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Clint Eastwood's love life was as legendary and as guarded as his film career. Over decades, he was linked to countless women, from actresses to models, friends, and companions, who entered his orbit briefly or lingered for years. Yet for all the public fascination, there was a pattern, a code he followed meticulously, one that few outsiders fully understood. He didn't date for publicity. He didn't seek approval or validation. Relationships, when they happened, were often intensely private, intensely personal, and fiercely controlled. And when they ended, the world rarely knew why. Some women remained companions in the public eye, like Maggie Johnson, his first wife, or Sandra Locke, his long-term partner and collaborator. Others, brief flings or secret liaisons, vanished from records entirely, their existence known only to a handful of close friends and colleagues. Hollywood insiders often described him as a man who compartmentalized life into neat, unbreachable sections. The actor, the director, the father, the private man, and the private man rarely made mistakes visible to the public eye. Yet, despite the code, whispers about children born out of sight began circulating. One daughter in particular remained hidden. For years, even those closest to Clint suspected, but never confirmed, her existence. Some called it a family secret. Others called it inevitable, life's consequences quietly tucked away, waiting for the right moment. Archival documents, legal records, and interviews later revealed a pattern. Eastwood's relationships, often overlapped, carefully managed to maintain appearances and avoid scandal. But beneath that careful management lay truth that would eventually reach the surface decades later when silence could no longer hold. What made Clint Eastwood's story different from most Hollywood legends wasn't the women themselves, but how he treated the outcomes. Children born from these relationships were not ignored. They were shielded, protected, and kept away from the public eye. In a world obsessed with scandal, this was radical discretion. It wasn't indifference. It was strategy. A principle he lived by: reveal only what is necessary. And for one daughter, that rule endured for nearly 5 decades. She lived her life unaware of the full truth, while the man she would later call her father continued on his path, building cinematic masterpieces, earning awards, and protecting the secret that could have overshadowed it all. By the time he turned 95, the world assumed it had seen everything. Every controversy, every love, every family story, on record, on camera, in interviews. Yet there was one revelation still waiting, quietly unfolding in the shadows. The whispers of Carmel, the careful compartmentalization of his private life, the unspoken rules with his women. All of it was leading to this: a secret daughter, long hidden, finally stepping into the light.